My name is Jade-Johanna Boone, and my partner, Trevante Faust, and I were able to analyze and construct the book Stop and Frisk. So, Stop and Frisk, the use and abuse of a controversial policing tactic, was written by Michael D. White and Henry F. Fredila and published with the New York University Press in 2016. So, Michael White, a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the Arizona State University. He's also a co-director in training and assistance to the Department of Justice body worn camera policy program being his specific area or department. He's also an associate director of Arizona State University for the Violence Prevention and Community Safety, while obtaining his doctorate at Temple University in criminal justice. Dr. Henry F. Fredila is a professor of law and criminology and forensic studies. He studied the intersection of law with social science, with this study focusing around the historical analysis of criminals compared to the constitutional laws implemented. He received his bachelor's degree from Clark University, majoring in psychology, his MFS at the George Washington University, majoring in forensic science, his JD at the George Washington University, also obtaining a degree in law, and a PhD at the Arizona State University in interdisciplinary justice studies, where he also is a professor. A little book background is that stop and frisk is a controversial police tactic that is used all over America, as you can imagine. Many police officers would stop and question and frisk people who they deem were suspicious, and this is based off biasing. The book is specifically based off the Terry versus Ohio case in 1968. The Terry versus Ohio is especially essential when constructing the procedures implemented by police officers. It allowed police officers to conduct investigatory detentions, also known as stops, and conduct pat downs for weapons, which is known as frisk. Stop and frisk has been an issue prior to the Supreme Court case, causing a racial tension to be high and cultural shifts to be outpouring within the crimes and immigration due to the industrialization era. So, research questions that my partner and I came up with was one, how can the criminal justice system establish protected boundaries for civilians during the stop and frisk process? Two, what unharmful tactics can police learn when dealing with civilians while still enforcing the law? Three, does the stop and frisk violate the reasonableness clause of the Fourth Amendment? Four, what actions or appearances justifies reasonable suspicion? Is reasonable suspicion racially motivated? In reading the book, both authors broke down this idea known as the Uniform Arrest Act. Created in 1939, there were a variation of ways that the police officers came in contact with civilians without issuing arrests. The act of arresting and detaining a suspect was based on the state statutes and not a universal understanding. The Interstate Commission wanted to collect data and study the arrests that were made across America. This study was generated in order to establish a unity within the laws across the country that would allow police to be collective in their tactics, because each state was doing different things for different crimes. The universal method created the Uniform Arrest Act, which is mentioned here. By 1968, the Supreme Court implemented that stop and frisk did not harm the Fourth Amendment rights. In the case of Terry versus Ohio, as previously mentioned, the court ruled that the states are a special case of seizures, as police officers do not need warrants, and that this is lawful when police officers have reasonable suspicion. The authors also noted that allowing police officers to have this power will result in racial biases that especially puts young black men in harm. So to break down the Uniform Arrest Act for you guys, I broke down two sections. Section 2 being that Police were able to identify anyone they believe was a suspect and reasonable to be searched based off their own beliefs. And three, they were able to seize any weapons during that stop that they believe would cause more crime or be conducted in a crime. So in a way, Uniform Arrest Act was used to prevent crime from happening. A few methods and evidence that we gathered was the issues of stop and frisk being found in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. In this book, the book focused around the New York Police Department, and although that it solidified what the New York Police Department did, it also expressed how other states outside of New York conducted the same excessive force and task. It also talked about increases of crime in New York, which led the NYPD to enforce excessive police force in their stop and frisk. Especially, we see that in the cases of Eric Garner and Daniel Prude, with Daniel Prude being a recent victim who recently died September 8th, 2020. While also focusing on the broken window theory, making sure they implement a zero tolerance policy. Police officers feel as if they reckon or they criticize, and chastise someone in public, it would prevent and deter others from committing crime. There are many instances where the Fourth Amendment is applied that prevents police officers from using deadly, extensive forces. In this book, the authors make a compelling case as to stop and frisk impact on the structure of police officers. Initially, stop and frisk had been created as a ubiquitous law across America to stop the excessive flow of crime. However, police officers are abusing this privilege they have. The relationship between the community and their trust for police has become strained and has resulted in a micro and macro level impact to a person and the structure of their society. Overall, they are both suffering physically, emotionally, and psychologically. This is evident in today's time, as though social media, we have access to the brutal killings of people like George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, too. These are videos that are consistently being played through our social media platforms and news outlets. Although the authors were collecting their data from the New York Police Department, they were also noted how other states shared the same excessive force and abuse issues with police interacting with civilians. And based on the broken window theory, police officers are using excessive force to make examples out of the people they see as deviant. They feel as if it is their duty to clean up disorderly neighborhoods, being low-income minority neighborhoods. By doing so, they are targeting individuals they believe are criminals. In the case of New York Police Department, the authors discovered that they are creating order maintenance policy by targeting gun violence in low-income, heavily minority populated communities. Some examples that we came up with was in understanding that from 2003 to 2011, 8 years, in 8 years, the stop and frisk quadrupled. And we also talked about a case known as Floyd versus the City of New York, which was conducted in August 2013. The aggression of stop and frisk plagued large minority communities. The authors point out throughout the book the alarming increase of racial tensions between the police and these minority communities. The Floyd versus City of New York was essential in developing this book, Stop and Frisk. In this case, Judge Shira developed a 198-page decision. The authors of the book used the decision to analyze and create a synopsis of their perspective of the stop and frisk law in the case, and it is essential to understand that the background of the case as the authors use current trends and legal matters to develop their relationship with the audience. With the combination of legal matters with social issues, White and Friedella are developing recommendations for proper policing. It is essential to know that this book was specifically wrote in 2016, especially with all the lives and loss due to excessive police force. So it combines with today's time and it relates with the audience of today. In conclusion, the police force, along with the criminal justice system, must learn to adapt and create community-oriented policies that create equality. In the previous and current years, racial discrimination, injustices, and stereotypes amongst black police officers have resulted in the loss of lives and time of minority Americans, with being put in jails for years at a time for small crimes compared to police officers actually killing individuals and serving no time. There must be procedural justice implemented into the police standards to give fairness and dignity to the individuals that they encounter. White and Fredilla are arguing to find a police interaction that does not result in the lost life of a citizen. From Michael Brown to the chokehold that killed Eric Garner, society is continuously being physically and psychologically scarred from police interactions, more so African Americans. When looking at a brief synopsis of Stop and Frisk, it is clear form of racial discrepancies that contributes to the injustices and racial discriminations that contribute to the policing of America. The authors, White and Fredela, believe once equitable programs are presented to police officers to stop and frisk can be established as a community-oriented policy compared to it being a zero tolerance policy. It is emphasized through the book that there is no room for zero tolerance policy, especially in the 21st century. And with this book being Stop and Frisk, I was able to pick up a few individuals who lost their lives due to being stopped by police officers. One, we have Philando Castile. He was killed at a police stop in front of his 4-year-old daughter and his wife. He was killed because the police officer asked him for his license and registration. When he reached for it, the police officer said he felt threatened and believed he was reaching for a gun. So he shot him several times, resulting in his 4-year-old child being scarred mentally, psychologically, as she watched her father bleed out due to the fear of a police officer. Next, we have Sandra Bland. She was stopped and dragged out of her car for simply not using her right turning signal. To us, not using a right turning signal is a simple write-off or a ticket of a violation of not using proper car equipment. But to Sandra Bland, it lost her entire life. She was actually found hanging from her jail cell, although she had no history of a suicidal past. And to note the devious plans of the police officers that took her in, they also took a picture of her mugshot while she was dead. Then we have Ayanna Stanley Jones, a 7-year-old black child, sleeping on her couch, and the police bombarded into her house, believing that there was illegal drug use, along with a suspect being harbored in her house. She was sleeping on the couch while she was shot in the head, and the police lied and said that this came from her grandmother because they didn't want to be held accountable. So it is aware that police are aware of their excessive force, but they do not want to relax or retaliate against it. And lastly, we have Laquan McDonald, shot over 16 times from walking away from a police officer because the police officer believed he was in danger. Although in the tape recordings is well aware that the police officer responded saying, "He's walking away from me, he's walking away from me." The police officer known as Police Officer Van Dyke was charged, one of the first police officers charged with killing on duty, serving 6 years in prison. Me and my partner decided to rate the book, and we gave it a 4 out of 5. Me, Jade-Johanna Boone, giving it being one of the best books I've read, simply because the book is essential, especially living through the Black Lives Matter movement that we are facing today, with police stops leading to the unlawful deaths of many Black Americans, and how police are using their excessive power to commit crimes and not be held accountable for those crimes. And Trevante believed that he would recommend this book because it is essential to especially be aware of the police brutality and abuse of power that is ongoing today. So he also thinks it's a really good read. Thank you.